On this episode of Narcissist Apocalypse, we talk with an abuse survivor named Sally. And Sally was married to a jealous physical abuser. It's a story of perfectionism, identity, boundary violations, losing yourself, putdowns, accusations, and post separation abuse. Welcome to Narcissist Apocalypse, everyone. I am Brandon Chadwick, and with me today we have Sally. How are you?
I'm good, Brandon. How are you?
Well, I'm doing well. Thank you for asking, and thank you for being here. And if you want to be a guest like Sally is today, please do go to our website at narcissistapocalypse.com and click on the guest form button at the top of the page. There you can read all of our instructions, and please read them all, and either send us an email at narcissistapocalypse@gmail.com or fill out our guest form and press the submit button, and please do send it in the format that we ask for. And we do have a content warning for this episode as we do discuss physical abuse in this episode, the survivor story. So that is your content warning for today. And today you're going to hear Sally's story. And Sally was married to a jealous physical abuser, and Sally was surviving as best she could. The rage didn't always show itself in this relationship, so there were reprieves in a lot of spots. Good times that last just long enough to feel like Sally could continue in the relationship. And I know Sally will really validate a lot of you out there today with her story. So now I'm going to get out of my way and your way. Sally, the floor is now yours.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to having this conversation with you and just sharing a little bit about my story and what I learned along the way. I think we typically start with childhood, right? And talk about our childhood experiences. So for me, I honestly grew up in a stable, supporting, loving household. I had my mom and dad present my whole childhood. They stayed married up until my mom actually passed away when I was 19 from cancer. My parents' marriage wasn't perfect. They had their share of arguments that my sister and I witnessed as kids, but nothing violent. I mean, I think in the grand scheme of marriages and relationships, it was fairly normal. But when I look back at my childhood, I and kind of thinking about where I ended up on my journey and getting into an abusive relationship, one thing that really stood out to me was just the values that my family had. And while I look at them as really good values, I think the values that were instilled in me kind of kept me in an abusive relationship for longer than I should have been in it. Also kept me in a corporate job longer than I should have. So those values were really, when I look back, like perfectionism was really highly valued. Being successful was really highly valued. As a kid, that looked like, getting straight A's in school and getting money for my grades and seeing my sister getting yelled at when didn't get the good grades. She was always kind of more of the rebel child, and I was the type A, always doing well in the things I was in. So it was, getting good grades in school, being successful in sports, having a successful career, going to a good college. All those things were just really highly valued. And that kind of never give up type of messaging came a lot from my parents. Persevere through things. And I saw that, I think, with my parents' marriage, knowing that there were a lot of times that I didn't feel like they were truly happy being married, but I never thought divorce was an option for them because of the values of our family and kind of from a religious perspective. So it was really instilled in me at an early age to be perfect, to be successful. The definition of success was clearly defined, and just to really stick with things and never give up. So I carried that with me through my life, and it's still something that I struggle with things like that I view, and probably still from that lens of a kid, as failure. Um, And again, I think it kept me in my marriage longer than than I should have been in, and my job that I was really unhappy with longer than I should have been. So that's really kind of my childhood in a nutshell, and how it shaped who I am, who I became as an adult, and who am today, even though I'm kind of shedding a few of those things still.
And what was your life like before you met the person that this story was about? Like, what was kind of going on in your world at that time? And, what were you looking for in the world and looking for in a relationship?
So I met him when I was in college. My life was good. I was really happy. I played Division 1 sports. That was like my dream as a kid. I played tennis growing up, so my ultimate goal always was to play college sports. So I was able to do that. So we met through college athletics. He had come over from a foreign country on a scholarship for his sport. So we met through that pretty early on in my college years. I was just a sophomore when we met. So to say I knew what I was looking for, I I can't say that. I think as a 19, 20-year-old kid, if unless your parents have had conversations with you about, what to look for in a partner, or what are healthy values, or what does a healthy relationship look like? I don't think most kids really know at that age. And I say kids, even though they're adults, but it's hard to know at that age exactly what you're looking for. So I think honestly, for me, it was, do I feel happy in this relationship? Yes. Am I having fun? Yes. What's the next logical step you take in life after you graduate from college? You get married. So I got married at 22, I think I was. Um, Even though I was already starting to feel some hesitation to getting married, I still did it. I think because, it's that societal expectations that that's just the next logical step. You graduate, you get the job, you get married, and life goes on. So
So, when it comes to meeting him, what are the things that you like about him? Like, what was the initial meeting like? And, how long did things kind of go on before you notice things could be abusive, or, as I say, red flags are red flags. No, sorry, red flags aren't red flags until they really become like a pattern.
right.
There's a lot of excuses, especially when you're younger. So, what is kind of your life initially like during that time with him?
It was kind of the standard college kid life. I think we connected over common interests. Again, we both played sports. We had similar friend groups. It was all about just having fun and being there for each other's things. So, he would come to my sporting events, I would go to his. He didn't have family nearby, so we would go visit my family on breaks and things like that. It was a fairly, I guess, normal relationship in college. We got engaged before graduation and ended up getting married. I think it was about one semester from me being done with school, so he could start filing the green card paperwork and things like that. So really up through our college relationship and engagement, I didn't, looking back, I don't see a lot of red flags. The red flags started at probably about 6 months after we had been married.
So, when it comes to your ex, before we move on, can you tell us a little bit about like where he came from, what his family was like, what his role within the family was like, and what he had to deal with kind of growing up, and how he wanted to be seen by society, and what he was really like, because part of the story is going to be a story of jealousy. So, where does that jealousy come from?
So I've pondered this question a lot. Like, why did he end up this way? Why does he have this abusive value set and this jealousy? And I mean, from everything I could gather, he grew up, and similar to me, in a stable family unit. Mom and dad were both around. He had siblings. He was supported. He played sports, and he made it far in his youth as well. So from that perspective, it seemed like a fairly healthy family dynamic, but he did make comments to me along the way that his dad was really jealous of his mom and oftentimes accused her of having an affair. So my ex, I know he saw that as an example, and I think it built a really deep insecurity within him, because I think that drove the majority of his actions. That drove the jealousy towards my career, towards other men. I think he just ultimately feels inferior, to a lot of people and a lot of things. So that's kind of where I see those abusive values developing. I think he always wanted to be seen as a good husband, as successful in his career, as a good partner, but a good dad. And so he presented himself that way to the outside. I remember when, right after we separated, I was talking to one of my neighbors who I actually consider myself to be fairly close to, but she told me, she was like, we had no idea what was going on. Like, you hid it so well. And he also, again, he portrayed himself as being someone who is a good partner and all that stuff. So I think that just kind of highlights that he was convincing and portrayed that well. So I think he wanted to project that, while inside he was deeply insecure and unsure of himself. So that's where that abuse would happen, behind closed doors.
And was he someone that had lots of friends, or did he just keep to, a small group?
He didn't have a lot of friends. He kept to a pretty small group. He had a handful of friends from growing up, a couple from high school or from college. But besides that, we mainly hung out with other couples. Like, once we were in our careers and working and had kids, we would mainly hang out with other couples that I knew from work who had children. So his social circle wasn't huge, say.
And when he talked about his mom and his dad, did he like both of them, or did he have a disdain maybe for one of them? And how did he feel about women as a whole?
He didn't have disdain for his parents, as far as I could tell. They seemed to have a pretty close relationship. I think now, like, that I know more, I would look at it as, especially with his mom, as kind of an enabling relationship. And I'll give you an example. While in that last incident, that event that happened, that was marked the end of our marriage, when he was assaulting me in our family home, he called his parents while he was doing it. So he would be following me around the house, doing his abusive thing. And then he would go off into another room and call his parents, crying and screaming. And I could hear them talking to him on the phone. Then he would hang up, and then he would come back and abuse me. And then he would call his parents. So it was like a really, I don't know, almost enmeshed type relationship. And after we separated, his family helped him harass me, so they would demand to FaceTime with my kids, who were under 3 years old, and they're not capable of having a FaceTime call for a half hour. They would show up and come to our court dates and make comments. And so they were definitely enablers, I would say, of him. In terms of his views of women, he never was like outright talking negatively about women. But I do feel like he must have something within him that doesn't think women should be successful and powerful, because he hated that about me, and he still hates that about me. And he's chosen a partner now who doesn't work. So, Yeah. I mean, I think there's something there, even though he's never directly said that. But he definitely feels threatened by successful women.
So, as you stated before, the abuse started 6 months after you got married. So, take us right here from when the abuse began.
Okay. So we graduated from school. We settled in a city about an hour away from where we had gone to college, both in our first jobs in our careers. And it was about, like I said, about 6 months into the relationship when I started seeing some like anger and rage that I never had experienced before. Just a really strong reactions to things that I wouldn't have, become angry about, he would get angry about. So I'll give you an example. When there was an instance, I think this was the first like scary event that I had with him. We had gone to a friend's house who lived nearby for the 4th of July, I think it was. And we had had some drinks and decided we shouldn't be driving. So we ended up walking home from their house. It started pouring rain on our way home. So we ran the rest of the way, but when we got to the door of our house, we realized we had left our keys at their house. So we had to run back and get them. But before we did that, he just flew into a rage and he was yelling and screaming and trying to kick the door in that was dead bolted. So I'm like envisioning like the door frame splintering off, and we had neighbors that lived above us in an apartment. So it was just, I just was shocked. I had never seen somebody have that type of reaction to something like forgetting keys. And then after we got the keys and returned to the apartment, he just kept yelling and screaming at me. I remember, and I don't even remember what it was about, but I was so scared I hid in the closet until he calmed down and ended up passing out. But I remember the next day he acted like, when I brought it up, I was very upset. I wasn't that intoxicated, so I remembered things clearly. But I remember when I tried to talk to him about it, he acted like he didn't remember. So that was the first of many of those types of situations where he would get intoxicated and behave that way, and then the next day say he didn't remember, even though it would start coming out that he did. But that's a common thing that abusers do is the whole forgetting thing and acting like they don't know what even happened. So that happened about 6 months in. And then, really, over the whole course of our marriage, which lasted about a little over 10 years, the common theme and the abuse that I experienced was around his jealousy and his jealousy of my career, because I did have a really good career. I worked for the same company for about 17 years up until 2020, a big grocery retailer in the US. And I was able to get promotions and I was successful. I worked really hard. But he always seemed to be envious of that and jealous of that, and would give me a hard time if I was working long hours or had, something I needed to do that cut into our time together. So the jealousy around my career and success was always a strong theme. And then jealousy towards the men I worked with. So he kind of would get fixated on one man at a time who I was working with and would insist that I was having an affair with them, and would, make comments about how I had dressed that day, insinuating that I was dolling myself up to get his attention. And I think the second kind of bigger incident that was scary was focused on a guy that I had worked with, and he and his fiance actually came over to our house for a party that we were having. And that just threw my ex into a rage. And that night that was the first time he was physically abusive towards me.
So, when he is physically abusive toward you, how are you feeling in the moment when that happens? How are you feeling after it happens? How are you rationalizing what just occurred? And are you talking to anyone? And is he someone who smooths things over? Does he try to blame it on you? Like what are the kind of things that he's doing to maybe manipulate this situation?
Mhm. So I'll start with how I was feeling. So to just give like paint a little bit more of a picture of what happened with this situation. So this was when my friend and her fiance, who my ex is convinced of having an affair with, came over to our house for the party. She was not from the area, so they actually ended up staying at our house. They stayed in a spare bedroom because people had been drinking. So it was directly across the hallway from our bedroom. So while he was physically abusing me, which it was really holding me down in bed, not letting me get up, calling me, names like you're a slut, you're a whore, those types of things. And he was loud enough that I feel like the main feeling I had was fear, because I didn't know when it was going to end. He just kept, if I tried to get up, he would push me back down. And the other feeling was just like embarrassment and humiliation, because I was just worried that my friend and her fiance across the hallway were going to hear it. I remember the next morning kind of holding my breath, like, oh my gosh, is he going to say something to me about this? Did she overhear it? So it was kind of that shame and embarrassment. I was just really upset, angry that I was treated that way. And also just knowing I wasn't doing anything. That's the thing that's hard with that insane jealousy, is it's so maddening, because when you aren't actually doing anything like that and having to defend yourself, it's just extremely frustrating. So those were the things I was feeling. That was another instance where the next morning he acted like he didn't remember what happened. And then as the day went on and I was insisting, like, no, it was really bad. It was really scary and I'm really upset. He started, quote unquote, remembering. And at that point he didn't blame me for it. He blamed it on the drinking and being out of control, and was entered into a really remorseful, almost sulking type behavior. There's some victim-y type behavior there too. Like, I can't control myself and I didn't mean to, and please forgive me, and kind of following me around the house and waiting for me to forgive him. So that was kind of how I was navigating things the next day after that.
So this incident occurs. From this point on, people lose parts of themselves when stuff like this happens. So did you alter your behavior now after this specific incident? And what was lost? And was this like a moment where you really started to notice or be hyper vigilant about your communications with other people and what was kind of going on during your regular day, even when he wasn't around?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think the jealousy, the accusations definitely made me alter who I spent time with at work. I really just surrounded myself with female coworkers. I would keep my interactions with them, my male coworkers, to a minimum. I definitely would never talk about interactions that I was having with any male coworkers with him, because I think it would just open the door to him being more jealous. And I think even like subconsciously, I would be probably molding myself differently around the male coworkers that I worked with, just with his jealousy in the back of my mind. So I think it did definitely change the way I behaved throughout my career around the male coworkers that I had.
So what happens from, this moment going forward?
So that was still pretty early on in our marriage. I would say that was within the first couple years that we were married that happened. The jealousy, the emotional abuse, that those types of things were kind of an ongoing theme. We ended up relocating after, I don't know, 5 or 6 years of living in our first town we lived in after graduating, to a new area for my job. And he then started fixating on a different coworker of mine. And that was something he focused on a lot over the next few years once we relocated. And it got to the point where he started monitoring my text messages. So I would all of a sudden get a notification when I was at work that your phone has been, I can't remember what it was. We had Apple phones at the time, but your phone is now connected to I don't know, something. So he was essentially logging in on a computer to be able to look at the text messages on my phone that were happening throughout the day. So he started monitoring my text messages. I think it all just kind of intensified when we moved and I got the promotion. From the monitoring of text messages to if I traveled for work, I would have to call him at the end of the night. If I was out late with coworkers, I would be read the riot act. Just traveling alone for work was really difficult, and I would dread it because I knew I would have to check in constantly. I would have to alter my plans to make him more comfortable so he didn't feel like I was out late. Just things like that were kind of a common thread.
So every day for you, when you get up in the morning, are you experiencing dread even like right from the morning? Because your whole day sounds like it could be avoiding landmines. So how are you feeling like energy wise during, this time? Are you noticing these things? Because it sounds like you could be in a survival mode every single day of not wanting pushback or blowback. So are you getting sick during this time at all? Like, what's kind of going on with your body and your mind? And are people noticing different things about you during this time? Like, what's kind of happening?
Yeah, I mean, I think when the text message monitoring started, that definitely created a new level of anxiety within me and just hypervigilance because I couldn't control what people would text me. Like if a coworker were to text me something, I can't control that. But knowing he's watching every single thing that was coming through my cell phone, whether it was from a male colleague or a female colleague, I had a group that I worked really closely with at my job, and we would text each other funny things, funny memes. So even just like an innocent, funny meme that doesn't have to do with anything would be like grounds for him to explode on me. So definitely felt like I was living in a hypervigilant state. I don't think I realized at the time, what a toll it was taking on me, but it was a major distraction, a major distraction from what I needed to do on a day-to-day basis. Like I had a demanding job. I needed to be able to focus at work. I needed to be able to talk to the people who I needed to talk with. So it just created a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, and ultimately it's hard to keep up with that for a long period of time before it starts to take its toll. But I don't think that happened. I was able to hold it together for a lot of years before it really started to affect me.
So eventually you also do have children. So when you do have kids, does abuse ramp up at that time? And is he like a model dad at that time, which makes things more confusing because he's acting like the person that I want him to be?
Yeah, actually, I know I've heard for many women who are pregnant that the abuse intensifies, but for me, I always felt like that was like a period of reprieve from the abuse. And I honestly think my theory is that, when you're pregnant and you're big and you're round and you're bloated, like I think it's less threatening to an abuser who has that deep insecurity and jealousy thing going on. I always felt like maybe he found me less attractive, so he assumed other men weren't looking at me during that time. So it actually was more peaceful for me when I was pregnant.
So about, let's say, the year 12 mark here, because, abuse is still going on. There have been incidents that have occurred. What's keeping you here? Because your relationship is 15 years long. So let's say like in year 12, what's keeping you in this relationship? Like, what are you telling yourself? Do you have fears about what's going to happen to the children if you leave? Like, what is actually, going on internally with you? Is it a fear of failure that, like, if I get divorced, I am bad? Like, what's the whole deal around that?
Gosh, I think it was a lot of things. I think number one, just fear of his reaction to that. I could never wrap my head around how I would even do it. How would I have the conversation with him? Do I like throw all my things in trash bags while he's out traveling on a work trip one day and just disappear? Like I the idea of doing it was so scary to me because I didn't know what I could expect on the other side of that. The other piece I think is just the dynamic of abuse and the confusion that creates within the victim, because abusers aren't always abusive. Our marriage wasn't always horrible. We had good moments too. We had moments where we were having fun, where we would take a fun trip and have a great time. But then there would be these instances of abuse. So it just leaves the victim feeling really confused, questioning, you know, questioning the reality of the situation. I remember I had to keep a notebook at work because something really bad would happen. And I would be like hell bent on, okay, that was it. That's my final straw. Then a few days would pass, a few weeks would pass, and I would forget how bad the situation was. I would minimize the abuse. So I started actually keeping a notebook of things that happened just to remind myself that no, this is actually really bad. But when we're entrenched in this cycle of abuse and all these things going on, it just creates so much confusion. So I think that was the other piece. Um, and then the kids, like I never went into being married and having kids with the intention of getting divorced. I always wanted to have what my parents gave us, a mom and a dad in the home and a healthy relationship. And I think because there were those good moments, it was hard for me to give up on the idea that I just couldn't make this work.
So eventually you're dealing with these incidents around 3 times a month, you told me. And then eventually there's a big defining incident. So walk us through this.
His reactions just got more and more severe. And there was one incident that was really the defining moment that got me to finally leave. And it was again around this fixation of other men. We had been to a coworker's 40th birthday party in town, and the person that he was fixated on was at the party too. We had a babysitter at home. By that time, we had had 2 kids. So we had 2 kids under the age of 3. And on the way home from the party, I could tell at the party things were not going to be good when we got home. He would come up to me and whisper in my ear things like, you're such a whore, you're such a slut, comments about this other guy that was there that he was obsessed with. So I knew things weren't going to be good when we got home, but he really started in as soon as we left the party. We had ridden our bikes there, and he, on the way home, was he would he would ride his bike really quick, fast in front of me and like almost turn it sideways to make me crash into him. Like he was trying to run me off the trail. It was really chaotic. And then as soon as we got home and let the babysitter go, he proceeded to just, scream and yell at me and assault me for a long period of time. It lasted, I don't know, probably an hour or 2 before the police came, when my sister finally called the police. So that was the escalation that finally got me to file for a restraining order, filed for an order of protection, and I filed for divorce the following week.
And at that point, you are obviously you've told people now and you were kind of out of hiding. So what was your feelings after all this happened, going from fear to relief? And um you brought up your kids here. So do you have a fear of what's going to happen to them as well when trying to make this decision?
I think in the immediate hours, days of that event happening, I was definitely in a state of shock. he had been physical before, but it had never been to that level. Um, so I was definitely in a state of shock, but at the same time, I refer to that as the worst night of my life and the best night of my life, because I feel like up to that point, like many people who are living in abuse do, I was waiting for something really bad to happen. It was like what was happening wasn't already bad enough. It's like if just something, maybe cheats on me, or I didn't realize in this case it would be a physical assault like this. um I felt like I had just been waiting for that one more bad thing to happen before I finally got the nerve to file for divorce. And that was it for me. So again, it was a really horrific thing to go through, and it sticks with you for the rest of your life. But it was also the best night of my life, because it finally pushed me literally and physically to do what I had been wanting to do for a long time, and get out of that relationship. So there was a sense of relief along with it. Again, like many abuse survivors do, you get out of the relationship and you think, it's over now. But unfortunately, especially when you share kids with an abuser, it's not that simple, and the abuse doesn't go away, and oftentimes it escalates. And that was the case for me. Just navigating the family court system and the divorce process, the abuse definitely escalated. It wasn't physical anymore, obviously, because he wasn't with me any longer, but just the abuse through the family court system, through the legal process. And then for years after our divorce, I dealt with a lot of post-separation abuse.
So can you take us through the beginning of this abuse and everything that occurred that you had to go through?
Sure. From when we separated on.
Yes.
Yeah. So, like I said, I was quick to file for an order of protection and file for divorce. That all happened within a couple of days of this incident. I was completely unaware of how divorces worked and custody decisions worked. But what I quickly learned was that abuse towards a parent doesn't carry a lot of weight in the family court system if nothing was physically done to the children. So I remember the judge, I think it was one of the first appearances we had to make in court, said something like, I think my attorney raised the domestic violence incident. He said, well, nothing was done to the kids, right? And I remember thinking, you've got to be kidding me, that the abuse towards a parent doesn't even matter. You don't view this person as unsafe when they've assaulted the mother of their children. And it was all just treated as a completely separate incident. So it didn't have really any bearing on our, where the custody agreement ended up. So he really, from the get-go, was pushing to have 50-50 custody of the kids. And I was really hesitant to do that after experiencing that with him. You see somebody who at one point cared about you and said they loved you, but then you see the side of them that is completely out of control and harmful. And while he was assaulting me, I could hear my kids crying behind their bedroom doors. So even though they were little, I know they had exposure to that abuse. Even hearing that type of abuse can cause harm and trauma to a kid. So I was not comfortable with a 50-50 arrangement. So from there, it was just, he would do anything and everything to harass me, to paint me as a bad parent. He talked a lot about, my work hours, that he was more present with the children than I was. He went as far as deposing the CEO and president of my company about my work hours. So he was doing anything and everything to just harass and intimidate me into a 50-50 custody agreement. But I stood as firm as I could, but ultimately got to the point 14 months later and finally agreed to something that was just slightly less than 50% for him. So that whole process was just really, I view it as like that period of time and then the years after with the post-separation abuse as it feels like it was more damaging and more harmful to me than the abuse that I experienced in the marriage. I think it's because the abuse that I experienced in my marriage was mainly around this topic of jealousy and like you're unfaithful and these things that were just deep down I knew that none of that was true. I had never cheated on him. I've never had come remotely close to cheating on him. I mean, I had 2 young kids. Like, even if I did want to do that, who has time for that when you got 2 little kids? So I think the way the abuse was directed at me personally, like I knew, or the type of abuse that was directed at me, I knew at that time that that wasn't true. When we got separated and were divorcing, he shifted the abuse more towards my ability to be a good mom, and a good co-parent, and targeted that part of me that is, when you're a parent, that's like your most treasured part of yourself. Ooh, it makes me a little emotional. Sorry. So, um, I think that was why that was so damaging. So, sorry. I didn't expect to cry.
Well, it becomes your identity.
Yeah.
Being a good mom becomes the most important thing to most moms.
Yeah.
And when that is your identity and an abuser knows what your identity is, attacking your identity is the most hurtful thing someone can do. Whether your identity is being an achiever, whether your identity is being, there for people, if that's your identity, if they attack those things that are what you feel is the number one thing about you, it can make you crumble. And
Right.
they can use at that point kernels of truth about anything that you're doing and wrap it in a lie and then feed it to you to then have you, not necessarily do what they want, but they know it's getting to you. And the more, if you try to fight back on something like that, then the more they know what it's doing to you, and that in their mind, they could be winning. So for you, when he is attacking those things, how are you responding to people? How are you responding? And how would he respond back? And how would you do that differently with hindsight now?
I think I learned pretty early on after we'd separated and I started getting, it was, weekly, sometimes daily, horrible text messages. I think I learned early on to not engage. I remember Googling like how to respond to text messages from an abusive ex. And I came across the gray rock method, I think it was called at the time. This is 10 plus years ago. I think now there's a new term, yellow rock, but I learned pretty early on that I was not going to ever win an argument with him. So if he said something insulting to me, to fire something back or to try to defend myself was just going to end up being a drain on my energy and just get me even more upset. So not to say I didn't ever fire back an emoji of the middle finger or something like that, but I learned pretty early on to just not take the bait and only respond to things that were pertaining to the kids. So we used our family wizard for a while to have some sort of guardrails around our communication. But even then, he would still say a lot of insulting things. But I've just learned to try not to engage with it as much as possible to protect my own peace.
And, in the aftermath of still dealing with him, what I guess are the biggest things that he's continuously doing? And how are you doing your best to protect your children, from a distance? And how are they affected by this now as they've gotten older?
Yeah. So fortunately, the the harassment and things like that has decreased over time. I would say we separated over 12 years ago. So within the last 5 years, I would say things have gotten better. Although I have started telling my story a little bit more, and within the last year, that abuse ramped up a little bit more, but it's calmed down as of recently. So it's kind of like been a roller coaster, But the first, I would say, 6, 7, 8 years were pretty bad in terms of just the harassment, ongoing harassment. So I learned along the way to, number one, to try to focus on my own healing and take care of myself so I could be regulated, calm, not be thrown off by these interactions with my ex, and just be the safe, stable parent that they need. I made a point to never speak negatively about their dad. I want them to ultimately to form their own opinions of their dad. But I have learned that there are ways of validating my kids' experiences when they're with their dad, because there have been things that have happened over there, to be a safe space for them to tell me about things that happen and have conversations with them that allow them to come to their own conclusions, so I've learned there are ways of doing that, to help kids, identify unhealthy behaviors and decide for themselves what's right and what's wrong. So I have found ways of doing that. As they've gotten older, I've started to have a little bit more frank and open discussions with them, when they come to me about things. But really, up to this point, I've just tried to be as neutral as possible, to educate them as much as possible, let them make their own decisions, and just be that safe space for them. I made sure they had counseling when they've needed it. I had one other thought that came up that I just forgot about. But yeah, I mean, those have been kind of my main approach to parenting them through this whole situation.
And during this, aftermath where you are divorced, but you're still dealing with him, how has the healing process been, and how has it been easy, and how has it been difficult? Or was it difficult, or was it easy because you're still dealing with harassment during this time? So getting anywhere with healing when you're constantly being triggered possibly by something or constantly being harassed is difficult. So how did you go about that healing process, and what were the things that you used?
Yeah, so I don't think I really realized I had much trauma from what had happened until I left my corporate job in 2020. I was so busy, trying to be a parent and work a demanding job and just hold everything together, that I didn't go to therapy. I had seen a therapist like during my marriage and right after it ended, but then I was like, I'm good. I'm doing the things. I'm working. I'm taking care of kids, and I'm fine. But it really wasn't until I left my corporate job that I realized, and I realized in the months leading up to that, that I just don't feel right. I don't feel. I noticed it at work where I just didn't feel as motivated. I felt really apathetic. I was struggling to concentrate and keep track of things. I was having a hard time handling stress, where I'd never really had that trouble before. But it really wasn't until I left and I started learning more about trauma through a trauma recovery coaching certification that I took. And it just really opened my eyes to how these invisible forms of abuse, the emotional abuse, verbal abuse, the narcissistic abuse, how damaging that can be to you, as you know, in your body. Obviously, I'd had the physical abuse, but I think I thought in my mind I had healed from that, like it was some isolated incidences and I'm okay now. But I didn't realize the toll that ongoing emotional, psychological abuse, this coercive control can have. So it really wasn't until probably 2021, 2022 that I actually started focusing on my own healing. And it's still a journey that I'm on. I still struggle with things from time to time. But I've tried a lot of different things, from just traditional therapy to, I've recently been trying brain spotting and rapid transformational therapy, which is a form of hypnotherapy. And I've also found just like finding my own outlets and activities that like bring me joy and light me up and make me feel more empowered have been really big on my healing journey too. So those things for me have been, I got into martial arts a few years ago, started doing it with my kids, thinking it was for them. But as I got into it, I was like, wow, this is really awesome for me. It made me feel more empowered, like I could defend myself. It made me feel strong. I ended up sticking with it and getting my black belt in Taekwondo, and that felt really good. So martial arts played a huge role in my journey. And then I played tennis growing up, like I mentioned. So I finally got back into tennis within the last few years. And I feel like that has sparked my competitive spirit again. I think when you go through abuse and you're so beaten down and I don't know, I felt like I kind of lost that spark or that drive to like compete and win. And I missed that about myself. And tennis has been able to kind of spark that back in me again, even though it's old lady tennis. I'm, in my mid 40s, but it's been a really healing thing for me too. And hiking, I love doing that, love being in nature. So finding those outlets and those things, I think is really important too, and can be just as beneficial as sitting in a therapy chair. So that's been really helpful for me.
And you mentioned, I think, when we started that, your story is about your relationship, but you did bring up work as well. So before we ever get to your words of wisdom, can we just touch upon like working for a place for 17 years and then, being let go? What did you realize about who you worked for and your role there and how you were really treated while trying to make your way through that company?
Yeah. I think what I realized was I had stayed in a situation where I was unhappy for way too long. It was a great company to work for. They were extremely kind to me when I separated from my ex. They gave me like a month off paid of work because they were extremely supportive, and it was a great place to work. But I was stretched really thin. I was doing basically two jobs that doing two jobs as one person that two people should be doing. And I'd gotten extremely burnt out. And I was just, I don't know, I think all through my career, I never really felt like it was the perfect fit for me, but it paid well. I had that, that image of success and sticking with something that long and working my way up through the company. But I truly wasn't happy deep down. So it reminded me of kind of my marriage too, that I stuck with something that I really wasn't happy with for a long time, a lot longer than I should have. So leaving there, I think, was like my last big lesson of, you've got to choose yourself. You've got to choose your happiness, and you've got to listen to the signals your body's giving you. Like I knew deep down in my gut, my marriage wasn't right for me. I knew deep down in my gut, my job wasn't right for me, but I stuck with it for so long. It's like that fear of failure, that, failure, air quotes, of what we tell ourselves is failure, but according to who, so I think that was one of my hopefully last things in my life where I just kind of stuck with it for those reasons. Now I feel like I'm able to decide a lot more quickly if something's not right for me and just rip off the Band-Aid and move forward.
And if you had any words of wisdom for everyone listening, what would they be?
So I thought of this statement. Sometimes what looks like failure from the outside is actually the doorway to your dream life. So I think I grew up learning a definition of what failure is. And I kind of applied that to my life moving forward and as an adult. But now I view failure a lot differently. People view leaving a marriage as failure sometimes, but when I look back, it would have been more of a failure for me to stick with that marriage and sacrifice my peace and my happiness and ultimately have my kids see an abusive dynamic and a mom who's really unhappy. So I view leaving that marriage as a success. And it took me a while, but I now view leaving my corporate job as a success too, because it was keeping me in a place where I really wasn't happy. And now I get to focus on creating a career for myself that is fulfilling and where I get to give back to other people who are going through the things that I went through.
And how do you measure success for yourself now?
Having a life that I love living, being able to make money and have a career, doing something where I feel fulfilled and like I'm giving back, being able to be there for my kids and spend time with them and be a healthy, stable parent for them, and just being able to enjoy life. Like, I'm not a big materialistic person. I would rather spend my money on experiences and getting to do cool stuff than having the latest, Louis V purse or something like that. So that's how I view success. Just really feeling like I've created a life that I love to live.
So, Sally, I just really want to thank you for being here today, sharing your story, how you were feeling in these moments, like, how you're rationalizing a lot of things. And then all of the post-separation abuse stuff. And I know it's going to validate a lot of people just listening to everything that you said. So just a really big thank you for being here with us today and sharing your story.
Thank you so much for having me, and I hope it's helpful to somebody out there.
Well, thank you, Sally, for being our guest today. And if you want to be a guest like Sally was today, please do go to our website at narcissistapocalypse.com and click on the guest form button at the top of the page. There you can read all of our instructions, and please read them all and either send us an email at narcissistapocalypse@gmail.com or fill out our guest form and press the submit button. And please do send it in the format that we ask for. Also, at our website, we have a support group. So if you need support, we have a support group at narcissistapocalypse.com. Click on the support group button at the top of the page, and you'll see that we have Zoom meetings every Wednesday nights, Thursday afternoons, and Saturday nights. We have forum boards for you to post on to get the validation that you need from survivors just like you. It is a wonderful group of people on there, and you can make a lot of friends too. So if you need support, join our support group today. And if you need even more support, please do visit our friends at domesticshelters.org. At domesticshelters.org, they have articles and resources to help you make sense of everything that you're dealing with. And they have every phone number, email address, and web address for shelters and agencies. And no matter how big or small the town you're in, domesticshelters.org has it there. So if you need extra support, please do go to domesticshelters.org. And we have friends of the show called Shelter Movers, everyone. And Shelter Movers can be found at sheltermovers.com. And what they do is they help you move all of your stuff from your home into storage. And that can be your pets and livestock too. So if you're trying to get out of domestic violence and coercive control and you need help leaving the home, getting all of your stuff out of the home and into storage, sheltermovers.com can help you do that. They're only available in Canada, and they are a donor-supported charitable organization. So if you need help from them or just want to donate to them, go to sheltermovers.com. And that is it for today's survivor story, for today's episode. So for myself and Sally, we hope you have a good night.